It started with my 3-year-old son screaming in his room in the middle of the night. When I came in to check on him, he was in hysterics, crying about how the Boogey Man had frightened him. I let him sleep with my wife and I for the night, thinking it was just a bad dream. The next evening, he didn't want to sleep in his room, but I convinced him that the Boogey Man was just a figment of his imagination. However, I found myself rushing to console him at 2 a.m. after being awoken by his screams once more. On the third night, I set up a camcorder in his room in order to show him that there was no monster. That evening, there was no screams and no crying. I was refreshed when I woke up in the morning after having gotten my first good night's sleep in 3 days. Although, when I saw my son, he seemed very fatigued. He didn't even put up his usual fuss when we got him ready for preschool, so when my wife took him to daycare, I decided to review the camera's tape in order to find out if he had slept. I'll never forget what I saw. Around 2 a.m., while my son was asleep, his closet door slowly creaked open, and out of the shadows crept a pale, naked, veiny woman with long, white hair. So bony you could see her spine protruding from her back when she turned away from the camera. He tried to scream as she reached her unnaturally large hands towards him, but her palm easily enveloped his head, muffling his cries. She snatched him up with the ease that a person of her frame should not have had, then walked back into the closet, only to return an hour later with what looked like a wriggling worm the size of a duffel bag, that she then placed it in my son's bed. Over the next 2 hours, I watched it twist and writhe while it grew and mutated until it looked like my baby boy. I don't know what the thing is that left with my wife this morning, but I know it's not my son. Until my mid-teens, I hadn't lived in one house for more than a year, though I've now been living in this house the longest, and my family thinks of it as home since we pay mortgage on it. I've always felt that my earlier houses were home. The yellow house wasn't one of those. I lived there before I entered school, so my memory of the pale, yellow house is fuzzy. But almost all of my memories in that house took place upstairs, in the converted attic where my siblings and I had our rooms. The house was very large, and a lot of the upstairs was still underdeveloped, filled with closed-off areas and dark closets hidden around corners and under beams. A house perfect for hide and seek, which quickly became our favourite game. Over the months, we began picking up strategies, such as taking our stuffed animals and arranging them in human-sized shapes and hiding them around the attic to throw the others off our trail till we could reach the furthest corner and call it safe. The last game we played still haunts me. After several rounds, I was labelled IT for the next game, and I put my face in the safe corner and began to count. Despite the lack of insulation and noise dampeners, we could never hear what the others were doing or what direction they went in. I knew they had to be setting decoys before settling into their hiding spots, but I couldn't pinpoint where or how many. When I reached 100, I spun and began my hunt. My brother was the easier of the two as he was only a year older than me and I found him with relative ease. But my older sister was a pro. She was where we picked up our tactics, but she was still the best and always made it to base. I always started my hunt for her in her bedroom, which was separate from mine and my brother's and considerably smaller. Her bed was occupied, but I knew it wasn't her. Too lumpy. I looked underneath and in the closet, but she wasn't there. I dug deep into the back of the closet and under the pile of clothes, but to no avail. I decided to move on when I thought I saw something move in her bed. I pushed onto the central lump and confirmed stuffed animals. I went for me and my brother's room. There wasn't anywhere to hide in mine, really. It was the largest and emptiest in the house with no closet, and our mattresses just sat on the floor instead of on bed frames. I checked around my side of the room and saw nothing. My brother's side was just as empty as mine, but I went to check anyway. His box spring was moved out at an angle, and his mattress flush against the wall. This wasn't uncommon, but I still yanked the mattress away. Nothing again. I headed out of the large room and began to search the closets and crawl spaces. I prided myself on how quiet I was, which was the only way I ever got close to where someone was hiding. I had narrowed it down to 2 doors, and as I reached for one, I heard a call of, "Ollie Ollie Oxenfree." "Damn it," I shouted. It wasn't uncommon for me to swear, even at a young age, and I rarely got in trouble for something as mild as damn. I began to crawl back out when I heard shuffling from behind one of the doors. My brother was stuck, sitting in the safe corner once I found him, and my sister had just called safe. I knew there were rodents in the house and decided not to let one out of the closet. I finished crawling backwards out of the narrow enclosure and turned to stand up. My brother was frozen. He was shaking violently and staring up at our sister. I had never seen his eyes so wide before, and when they flicked over to me, he seemed to be begging for help while still urging me to run. What was he so scared of? I started to walk over and he whimpered. I stopped again when I realized how wrong the situation was. My sister wasn't wearing her jeans and t-shirt, but instead was covered in a pile of dirty clothes and stuffed animals. I almost laughed if it hadn't been for my brother's terrified face. As she turned towards me, I saw not my sister, but something terrible. Her mouth was oddly shaped, the corners dug in and didn't close all the way, and the smile was almost toothless. Those teeth that were left were yellowed and decayed. Her eyes were almost sweet but were watering profusely. She tried to blink, but the area around her eyes just twitched. She didn't have eyelids. She looked too thin and was bruised and yellow everywhere I could see. She called again. "Ollie Ollie Oxenfree!" She grabbed me and shoved me towards the corner where my brother sat shaking. "You're still it." I couldn't speak. I grabbed onto my brother as hard as I could and realized I was crying. She waited. I couldn't blink, I didn't want to blink, and I certainly didn't want to turn my back on her. She began to frown, her eyes still watering. She narrowed them as much as she could. "You're still it," she yelled with a hoarse voice that was nothing like the sweet call she had given before. A small glob of blood and flesh flew out of her mouth as she kept yelling over and over, "You're it! You're it! You're it!" She began to jump up and down, stomping hard against the wood flooring, and blood spraying against us from her torn throat. I could see my older sister standing there, behind her, trying to gain the courage to hit the girl. She picked up one of the loose beams and raised it over her head. As she brought it down with all her strength, the girl spun and grabbed it, shoving her back. "She won't play right." She hardly had a voice now, and every time she exhaled, blood would fly out, and it was starting to trickle out of the corner of her mouth. She shook my sister violently, throwing the board to the other end of the room, screaming over and over that I was still it, until I finally found the courage to stand. Alright, I'll play." I was barely audible, but she heard me fine. She spun around again, laughing. I gave my sister a desperate look and began to turn into the corner. 1, 2, 3. I heard a giggle and bony feet scamper off. My siblings slowly went to hide, together this time. I knew they were in one of the closets that were just barely in my peripheral vision, and when I turned, they held it slightly open. 100, I whispered. I gulped heavily and went about my usual hunt. I gave my siblings a nod and headed for my sister's room. There was the form on the bed. This time, I couldn't be sure that it wasn't the girl. I pushed against the lump, and when my hand sunk in, I thought it was fine. I checked under the blanket anyway. I turned over the clothes on the floor, and when I didn't find her there, I hesitantly opened the closet. I couldn't see her, and I was afraid to dig into there. I did it anyway. I pawed through the clothes and shoes in the floor of the closet and pretended that I hadn't felt a bony foot under one of the shirts. I moved the clothes to the other side and saw her unblinking eyes staring at me. Shaking, I went to touch her. As I pushed my hand against her shoulder, it sunk into her flesh. I yanked my hand back and stuttered, Found you." She smiled as wide as she could and swiftly moved past me. I shuddered as she brushed past my shoulder and turned to watch her, pulling down a scarf as I did. When she was almost out of the bedroom door, I hooked it over her head and slid it perfectly into the sunken areas of her mouth. I tied it as hard as I could and started screaming for help as she struggled against me. My siblings ran over and tackled her. I grabbed another piece of clothing and kept handing them off until we had her so she could barely move. We dragged her to the smallest closet in the darkest area of the upstairs and shoved her inside, slamming the door and blocking it with several loose boards. We couldn't sleep upstairs anymore, so for the last months we lived there, the three of us would lie down in the family room and listen to her, thumping and hoarsely shouting against the gag, trying to get out of the closet. When we finally got into the moving truck at the end of the summer, we all tried to pretend we didn't see her, pounding against my sister's bedroom window, scarf still tied tightly around her head. That thing has been there for almost a week, the figure in the window. It looks featureless, only skin on a human frame, and it's pressing itself against the glass somehow. I don't know how it got there, and I don't know how to get rid of it. At first, I thought it was a prank, a doll or mannequin that some jerks put there to scare me. But I realized as I walked out of my house to pull it away, it wasn't there. I shrugged it off, thinking that someone had hidden it while I was talking through my door. But I went back in and looked out that same window, and it was looking in, staring at me. I walked around my house, yelling for whoever it was to come out, but no one was there. The thing is hairless and naked, and it didn't look like it actually had eyes, or even a face at all. But its head is turned towards me when I enter the room. When I sit on my computer, I can feel its faceless hatred boring into my neck. But when I turn around, it's innocently turned in a different direction. Finally, on Thursday, I tried to open the window, but it's stuck. I think the thing's hands are keeping it down, but I got a good look at its face. Its eyes and mouth are behind the skin, pushing outward. It stared at me, smiling. Of course, I screamed. I pulled back a fist and smashed it onto the glass, determined once and for all to get rid of the glaring monster. I know I'm strong enough. That glass should have cracked. But it didn't. It shuddered under my hand, but it didn't break. And that smile just got wider and wider and wider until I thought its head would break in half. It raised its own hand and bashed the window with its palm. It was mocking me. But I saw the faintest crack begin to appear where it had hit, and I backed away. No way did I want that smile in the same room as me. So I got a roll of duct tape, and I started covering the window. I couldn't look directly at it. I nearly crapped my pants knowing it was watching me. But I couldn't help it. I took a quick glance at the skin-covered face. A small peek. It was angry. That grin was now a gaping frown full of teeth. The skin had ripped away from its mouth and I could see down its cavernous throat. A menacing rumble started to fill the room, and that hairline crack began to spread like splintering ice. I pulled down the duct tape. The rumble stopped. The split skin healed over, and it began to smile again. Now it's night, and the noise hasn't started again. There are no sounds, no rumble, no crackling of glass. Everything's quiet now. I can feel its claws gripping the back of my chair. I can hear its skin stretching as it smiles. It's watching as I record this. My name is Abram, and I'm from a rural town in Montana by the name of Millsby. A quiet, farming town. I always had room to move about with my friends. The parlour would always welcome us, and we spent our evenings roaming the field. I've always had fond memories of my hometown, and I loved my family and friends, and most of my memories of the town bear such emotions. But something has edged its way into my memory. A past event that horrifies me when I think of it. It was the summer of 1982, April 7th to be exact. My friends and I decided to spend that day in the fields, galloping about and generally having fun, as 16-year-olds should. It was a breezy day, with amber leaves billowing across our growing hairlines, and the tall golden reeds tweaking slightly. It leaves such a crisp thought in my mind. That was 30 years ago, and I mustered up the courage to share my story. It will be hard to recall, but I shall try to the best of my ability. On that April day, I and two of my friends, Angie and Don, had decided to stay in the fields after dark as an early birthday present, as mine was a week away. The stars at night were beautiful as diamonds, and Don had even brought a few fireworks. "You have no idea what I went through to get these," he said the night before. "But it'll be worth it, I promise, Abe." I'd only nodded in agreement. Don was always the risk-taker among us, while Angie had been the quiet one, going along with her own plans and ambitions. We were hiking to an old part of the woods, past the fields, where the smoke from the granaries and textile shops faded, and the skies were even clearer to the eyes. I had never been at this area, but Don assured me naturally, and I wiped the sweat from my chestnut-coloured brow. Yeah, I said. "How do you know this place, anyway? Your pappy bring you here?" I was heaving from the jog. "Nah," came his reply. "But me and Angie cuddle up here." His laugh was cut short from a sharp smack from Angie. "Shut it, Don." She too was out of breath. Don just laughed his choppy laugh. It sounded a little deeper than usual. I attributed it to his growing stature. "Whitey's got a temper," he barked. I calmed him down with a, "Hush, that toad man'll hear you." They paused and looked at me for a moment, before turning and continuing through the thickening trees. I smiled to myself and followed. The toadman always got under their skins, and I knew that. The Toadman was a rumour that spread through the town in the 1890s, when a few children were found dead in a river by a toad's nest. Their limbs had been chopped off by, what the judge said, a small axe. They found the guy who did it, a man by the name of Keith Lesler, and executed him. Ever since, adults had been warning their kids to stay away from the creek near the woods. But as is prone to happen, kids forgot. 3 came to the creek, found no Toadman, and have sneaked there a few times since. The area was, in fact, about half a mile from where we were, down an embankment. But that wasn't in my mind as we strode. We merely edged nearer to the center of the trees. Once in the clearing of the center, we laid down in the tall grass to watch the sky. I breathed a long, peaceful sigh. Oh man, this is great, you guys. The air, the stars. It's a... Hey Don, where are you? Confused, I stood, the grass reaching my upper torso, around 5 feet 6 inches by then. I wasn't worried for him, as he liked hiding and tricking us from time to time. I rolled my eyes and fished for Angie's hand, but found nothing but sodden earth. Believing her to be in on it, I lied back down to watch. They would pop up, scaring the living Jesus out of me, and laugh it off with big smirks, as they'd done before. After about 10 minutes of this, however, I grew worried. Why haven't they shown up? I thought. Confused, I roamed the field to search for them. After 5 minutes of searching the tall blades of grass, I sprinted into the woods. Something wasn't right, and I knew it. I cursed at myself for letting slip of the Toadman and piquing their curiosities. My gut told me where they were, at that swampy embankment where we had played as children. After reaching the murky edges, I looked around for my friends. Donnie? Angie? I cried. I had no idea what was happening. I kept yelling, reverently, for my friends. But something got my attention after a moment. A rustling in the grass. Yes? I edged toward it and spoke softly. Donnie? Is that you? I only got a response from behind me. Yes. I didn't have time to sigh as I launched myself away, barreling towards the field. I heard his footsteps behind me, slopping on the ground as if his feet were muddy. I pressed on faster, only for the footsteps to match my pace. I dived into the grass as I reached the field and crawled as silently as I could away. Once I felt I was safe from him, I peeked through the reeds, and what caught my eye made me vomit. He was around 6 feet tall and burly. He was clothed in what I could assume a swamp walker's attire, with knee-high boots, a fishing vest, and green overalls, all covered in blood and mud. And around his waist were heads. The heads of my friends, and the wrinkled heads of others, hair stretched to ring his belt, which was lined with crusted blood, and only exaggerated his scent. He smelled like a rotten corpse. I tried scrambling away, but my toes stuck something hard, and I fell. He immediately turned his head, and I lunged. I barely had time to roll away as his axe sunk into the ground and dart around him, putting in all the strength I could muster I drove my heel to his gut. To my shock and horror, my foot sunk through him, and grinning like a madman, he swung his axe again, cleaving my leg from the knee down. I screamed, falling like a dead weight. He grinned wider, gripping my leg like a trophy. I knew that soon it would be my head he was holding. He raised his axe once more, but I managed to claw my way under his legs, gripping what I tripped over, hopefully to smash his head in. To my surprise, however, it was a wooden crate containing the fireworks Don brought. With little effort, the Toadman grabbed my stump and pulled me up, raising me up so I was eye level with him. His bubbled complexion brought bile from my stomach, but I instinctively dropped the crate downwards onto his head. He dropped me, grunting in surprise. I knew it was my only chance. I pulled away his axe, tossing it and reaching into my pocket. I slipped out the grinding stone that I carried for farm work and scraped it against the crate, sparking the fireworks. With all I could, I crawled away and turned. The Toadman gave me a look of utmost spite as he combusted, the lights spraying a shower of viscera on the area. I lost consciousness. The look burned into my mind. I woke up sometime later, in a cot outside my home. My parents searched the woods for me and carried me back. With surgical help, the town doctor cleaned and mended the wound. They found neither of my friends, however. I look back on this memory as a curse that has haunted me. I couldn't even get near the woods anymore, and no one would believe my experience. I know, however, one thing. The Toadman is still there, waiting for me.